I mean, imagine sitting in a damp first-century prison cell, um, just waiting for a Roman executioner to walk down the hall.
Right.
And you decide to write a letter to your closest friends. But instead of, begging for a rescue or mourning your lost potential, you tell them that this specific moment in chains, in the dark, is the absolute peak of human success.
Yeah, you tell them you are winning.
Which just sounds like madness to modern ears. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am your host, and today we are doing a brand new deep dive into the source material you provided, analyzing a massive existential question.
And that question is, what constitutes a wasted life? And how does the pursuit of divine satisfaction act as the active antidote to that waste?
We have a fascinating stack of texts on the table today for you, our listener. We're looking at comprehensive theological expositions of 2 letters written by the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, we are focusing on his letter to the Philippians, specifically chapter 1, and his letter to the Ephesians, focusing on chapter 4. The authors of these sources take these ancient texts, use them to diagnose the human condition with, surgical precision, and then present a radical, joy-driven alternative to the self-centered isolation that characterizes so much of modern life.
So that means we are asking you to take your modern self-help definitions of happiness and just put them in a drawer for a while.
Definitely. Leave them behind.
We are stepping out of the 21st century and walking into the gritty, high-stakes world of the first century Roman Empire, a culture that was obsessed with status, honor, and financial security.
But before we get to the Roman Empire, the sources insist we have to define our terms, right? They frame this entire discussion around a concept drawn from the historic Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Which, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with that document, a catechism is a historic teaching tool formulated as a series of questions and answers.
Spot on. The Westminster Shorter Catechism was drafted in the 1640s by an assembly of theologians to distill the core of the Christian faith into accessible truths. The very first question it asks is massive. It asks, what is the chief end of man?
And the answer it provides is, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever.
Yes. And the authors of our sources argue that understanding this single sentence is the key to unwasting your life.
The text points out something about that phrase that completely shifts how you read it. Like, the catechism does not say these are 2 separate goals.
No, not at all.
It doesn't say you glorify God by doing a bunch of tedious, miserable chores on Sunday, and then, you get to enjoy him as a reward later in heaven. The authors argue these are one indivisible reality.
That is the core argument. You cannot separate duty from delight. The supreme glorification of the Creator happens precisely through the creature's eternal satisfaction in him.
So it's not a transactional thing.
Right. Think of it like a mirror reflecting the sun. The mirror does not manufacture the light, It simply angles itself to catch the brilliant rays and reflect them back.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, to enjoy God is to angle the mirror of your soul toward him, catching his worth and reflecting it outward. To glorify God is to find in him the all-sufficient treasure of your existence, proving to the world that he is infinitely valuable.
Which brings us to the reality of our current state because, well, we're not naturally doing that. The text uses a phrase borrowed from the reformer John Calvin, describing the human heart as a perpetual factory of idols.
A factory of idols, yeah.
We are constantly running a mental assembly line, manufacturing alternative things to worship. We reject the living waters for what the sources call broken cisterns.
And this leads straight into how the sources redefine a wasted life. The biblical definition stands in stark contrast to the modern secular view.
I mean, if you ask a sociologist or a secular philosopher what a wasted life looks like, they will likely describe a life cut short by extreme poverty, obscurity, terrible addiction, or overt criminality.
Sure, the visible tragedies.
Right. But the sources present a diagnostic view that is much more uncomfortable. They describe the quiet, respectable tragedy of the middle-class dream.
Wow. The middle-class dream as a tragedy.
Yeah, a life spent meticulously accumulating the brief, decaying ornaments of the earth, upgrading the vehicle, expanding the square footage of the house, managing the retirement portfolio, all while remaining utterly bankrupt of passion for the majesty of Jesus Christ.
So a life that looks completely successful from the outside.
Let me push back on that a bit, though. If someone is working a normal 9-to-5 job, paying their mortgage on time, raising their kids, and keeping their lawn mowed, society points to them and says they're a success. But reading through these sources, it sounds like climbing the corporate ladder is essentially climbing the wrong wall entirely if it lacks this specific joy in the Creator.
The authors are very careful not to condemn ordinary labor, though. You do not need to quit your job and become a vocational minister to avoid wasting your life.
Okay, that's a relief.
Right. What the texts aggressively condemn is the internal idolization of safety. They condemn prioritizing self-preservation over the magnification of Christ.
So it's about what drives you.
Absolutely. If your entire physical existence is driven by a desire to simply accumulate wealth, avoid discomfort, and protect your own status, even if you look highly respectable to your neighbors, you have completely missed the reason you were given breath.
And that redefinition of success brings us directly to the man we mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive. We are looking at a man who lost all earthly status.
He lost everything.
He lost his career trajectory, he lost his freedom, but he claimed to have gained everything. We are looking at the Apostle Paul, writing from a Roman prison to the church in Philippi.
To understand the weight of Paul's words here, we really have to grasp the historical context of Philippi itself. It was not just some random city.
Right, it was a colony.
Yeah, a proud Roman colony located in Macedonia. It was populated heavily by retired Roman military veterans. The citizens there enjoyed massive civic privileges, including tax exemptions and the right to purchase land.
Which was a big deal back then.
Huge. They prized Roman order, public honor, loyalty to the emperor, and their elite status.
And the church planted in that city was born in absolute chaos.
Mm.
I mean, the book of Acts, specifically chapter 16, details Paul and his companion Silas arriving in Philippi.
Things escalated quickly there.
To say the least. They are dragged into the marketplace, beaten severely with rods, and thrown into the inner dungeon. We are talking about maximum security here. Feet fastened in the stocks, pitch black, filthy conditions.
And then the earthquake hits.
Right. There's a massive earthquake, the prison doors fly open, and the local jailer is so terrified of Roman punishment for losing his prisoners that he nearly takes his own life before Paul stops him.
Which leads to the jailer's conversion.
Yeah. So fast forward roughly 10 years to the early 60s AD, Paul is writing a letter back to this same church in Philippi, but he's writing it while chained to a Roman guard, likely under house arrest in Rome itself, waiting to hear if Emperor Nero is going to have him executed.
Which, in the Roman honor-shame culture, a chained leader was a defeated leader. He looked like an absolute failure.
Totally. To the outside world, this entire Christian movement appeared to be ending in humiliating defeat.
Yet, in the middle of this objective humiliation, facing an executioner's sword, Paul writes one of the most staggering claims in the entire text. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 21, he says, "To live is Christ, and to die is gain."
That is just wild to say when you are facing execution.
Paul completely redefines the economics of human existence right there. In the Roman imperial system, you achieve gain through military conquest, acquiring land, elevating your social status, hoarding wealth.
And Paul says death is gain.
The sources clarify that Paul is not being morbid here. He is not romanticizing death. Death remains a terrible enemy, a horrific intrusion brought into the world through human rebellion against God.
But for the believer, because physical death acts as the immediate doorway into conscious, uninterrupted fellowship with Christ, it registers on the balance sheet as a net positive.
It is a massive upgrade.
Think about the shock the Philippian believers must have felt hearing this letter read aloud in their gathering.
It would have been completely backward to them.
Right, because their entire civic identity, their whole social conditioning as Roman citizens, was built on avoiding shame. Losing your freedom, being placed in chains, was the ultimate public disgrace.
Yet their founder claims his humiliation is actually a decisive victory because his chains have given him a captive audience with the imperial guard. He is using his captivity as a pulpit.
So it's almost like looking through a telescope.
How do you mean?
Well, the text mentions magnifying Christ. Does a telescope make a star bigger? No. The star is already burning with massive, terrifying heat millions of miles away.
Right.
The telescope simply helps our weak, limited human eyes perceive how massive that star actually is. Is Paul saying his broken, imprisoned physical body is just the lens?
The sources affirm that analogy beautifully. Christ is eternally glorious. His majesty cannot be increased or diminished by anything humans do.
So Paul's suffering is just the instrument.
Precisely. Paul's physical suffering acts as the optical instrument to display that infinite worth to a watching world. The telescope does not add anything to the star. It brings the reality of the star into sharp focus for the observer.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Paul's supernatural joy in a miserable prison brings the reality of Christ's supreme worth into focus for the Philippians, the Roman guards, and eventually the entire world reading his letter.
Wait, hold on, though. If Paul genuinely believes that dying is a massive gain, and if leaving this physical world brings him into immediate fellowship with Christ, why wouldn't he just want to escape his suffering right then and there?
Right, why not just punch the ticket out?
Yeah, why endure the Roman prison, the chains, and the cold if the exit door leads to a far better reality?
You have hit on the central holy dilemma of Philippians chapter 1, spanning verses 22 through 26. Paul is pressed incredibly hard between two very real desires.
Okay.
On one hand, he desires to depart and be with Christ. He explicitly states that this option is far better.
On the other hand,
On the other hand, he recognizes a pressing pastoral necessity to remain in his physical body, and he makes the deliberate choice to remain. The text says he remains for the progress and joy in the faith of the Philippian believers.
so he stays for them.
This reveals something vital about Christian hope. Having an absolutely secure future does not make believers passive in the present. It makes them intensely, dangerously useful.
Because he doesn't have to worry about himself anymore.
Spot on. Because Paul knows his eternity is locked in, he does not need to spend his earthly life building a legacy or protecting his safety. He can spend his present reality laboring entirely for the spiritual benefit of others. Remaining on earth equals fruitful labor.
The sources dig into the concept of joy here, bringing up the Old Testament Hebrew word simcha.
Yes, simcha.
They make a sharp distinction between this concept and our modern idea of happiness. We usually think of joy as a bubbly mood, or a positive personality trait, or just having a good day because the weather is nice.
But the ancient biblical concept of simcha is a deep, covenantal gladness experienced directly in the presence of Jehovah.
It's not just a fleeting emotion.
No, in the Old Covenant, this gladness was intimately tied to the sacrificial system that temporarily covered the sins of the people, allowing them to approach a holy God.
And in the New Covenant,
In the New Covenant, the authors argued this joy is fully realized and made permanent through the definitive, once-for-all sacrifice of Christ.
okay, let me push back on this practical application again.
Go for it.
If my entire reason for staying on Earth is to generate joy in other people, I am going to burn out in about a week. I mean, managing other people's emotions is exhausting.
It really is.
How does this not just turn into a relentless treadmill of religious activism, where I'm running myself into the ground trying to make sure everyone else is spiritually happy?
The text is exceptionally careful to avoid that trap. The argument is not that we benefit others as an ultimate end in themselves.
Okay.
Making humans the center of your effort leads to the exact burnout you were describing. The mechanism works in a completely different direction. We delight in Christ first. We find our absolute satisfaction in him, and that specific, intense delight naturally overflows outward.
So it's an overflow issue.
Yes. Ministry and service become the automatic byproduct of your own satisfaction in God, not some legalistic chore you perform to earn status or appease guilt. You're simply inviting others into a joy you already possess in abundance.
So if the ultimate goal of an unwasted life is propagating this divine satisfaction to others, what is the single greatest relational obstacle that stops us from doing so?
Well, according to the text you provided, the answer is our natural human tendency to hold grudges.
Which brings us to the second source material, analyzing Paul's letter to the Ephesians. We're focusing tightly on Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32.
Which reads, "And become ye toward one another kind, tender-hearted, forgiving."
And to fully grasp the staggering weight of this command, we have to examine the socio-religious backdrop of the city of Ephesus itself. Ephesus was an absolute powerhouse.
Oh, massive. A wealthy metropolitan hub with a population of roughly 250,000 people.
It was dominated visually and economically by the colossal temple of Artemis, which was one of the wonders of the ancient world. And the sources note that this temple did not just function as a place of worship.
No, it acted as the central commercial bank for all of Asia Minor.
The Ephesian culture integrated financial security, social standing, and civic pride, all under the banner of pagan worship. And on top of that, the city was heavily steeped in dark occult practices.
Right, we read in the book of Acts about the public burning of magic scrolls valued at 50,000 pieces of silver.
That is an astronomical sum of money.
It represents a massive cultural and economic upheaval. Paul spent 3 years in this city, planting a church in the middle of dense, hostile spiritual darkness.
Disrupting the local economy so severely that it started a citywide riot among the silversmiths who made idols.
And we have to remember, the culture of Ephesus was driven by a strict Greco-Roman honor-shame system.
Right. Explain how that system worked for them.
Well, in that ancient system, refusing to avenge an insult was viewed as unmanly weakness. If someone slighted you, if they damaged your reputation or stole from you, social survival dictated that you retaliate immediately to maintain your public honor.
So forgiveness was seen as weakness.
Absolutely. Forgiving a debt or an insult without demanding compensation was social suicide.
Honestly, we do the exact same thing today, just without the togas.
That's so true.
We all have an internal accounting ledger where we tally up who owes us an apology, who slighted us in a meeting, who didn't text back, who embarrassed us. We are constantly ledger keeping.
And the text says we have to burn the ledger.
But Paul commands the Ephesians to be tenderhearted. How can an apostle command an emotion? Like, you could force someone to behave politely, but you cannot just flip a switch and feel tender toward someone who betrayed you.
The Greek text provides a brilliant psychological insight here. The apostle uses the imperative word gynist, which translates to keep on becoming.
Keep on becoming.
Yeah, it acknowledges that this is not an instant static switch you flip. It represents a continuous, active transition of character within the covenant community.
So it is a systematic dismantling of our natural defensive wiring over time.
You are actively choosing to cultivate compassion, stripping away the hard, cynical, defensive shell of the old human nature piece by piece.
And the text reveals the mechanism of how we burn that ledger. It's found in a fascinating linguistic choice by Paul regarding the specific word he uses for forgiveness. Let's look at the Greek words for forgiveness because the contrast here is staggering.
It really is.
If someone owes you money and you cancel the debt, the standard legal term in the New Testament Greek is aphemi. It means releasing someone from a legal obligation or zeroing out a balance.
But Paul deliberately bypasses that standard legal word in Ephesians chapter 4. He does not use aphemi. Instead, he uses the word chorizomai.
And chorizomai is rooted in the word charis, which means grace or unmerited, free favor.
To see how radical this substitution is, we have to look at classical Greek literature. Writers like Plato and Aristotle.
What did it mean to them?
In their writings, chorizomai was a loaded political term. It described a wealthy, aristocratic patron granting a massive political or financial favor to a social inferior.
So it was highly transactional.
Completely. If a patron granted you a charis, you owed them lifelong loyalty, public honor, and political reciprocity. It was a mechanism for acquiring social leverage and controlling people below you.
Wow. But Paul takes this aristocratic, manipulative word and completely subverts it. He strips the leverage right out of it.
Yes. He applies it to equals inside the church. Using the phrase is alleles, which means toward one another.
So inside the covenant community, no one is the wealthy patron leveraging their forgiveness to control the room. Everyone is a rescued beggar who's now commanded to bestow free, unmerited favor on other rescued beggars, expecting absolutely nothing in return.
It is like a bank account.
Yeah, like standard forgiveness, canceling the debt, is just zeroing out a negative bank balance. If someone steals from me, I say, fine, you don't owe me the money anymore. The balance is zero.
Right.
But Paul is saying we have to zero out the balance and then turn around and deposit $1 million of active, generous kindness into the offender's account.
That captures the essence of charizomai beautifully. You are treating the offender not merely as debt-free, but as a recipient of active, lavish favor.
And the reason we are commanded to do this impossible thing is because that is the standard God used for us.
Exactly. The verse concludes with the comparative causal phrase, even as God in Christ forgave you. That historical reality acts as the sole logical ground for our action.
Which requires us to look closely at the historical, legal basis for God's forgiveness. The sources are adamant that God did not just wave a magic wand, ignore our cosmic treason, and pretend the debt did not exist.
The theological mechanics here are absolutely core to Reformed thought. The text discusses the concept of being in Christ, referring to what theologians call the pactum salutis, or the covenant of redemption.
A covenant of redemption.
Think of it as a divine agreement made before time even began between the members of the Trinity to secure the salvation of a specific people. God is entirely holy and just. He cannot simply overlook human rebellion without violating his own righteous character.
Justice must be fully and perfectly satisfied.
Yes, this is where the sources break down the concepts of Christ's active and passive obedience.
Let's unpack those two categories because they explain how this $1 million deposit of grace actually gets funded.
Christ's act of obedience refers to his flawless, lifelong conformity to the divine law. For 33 years, he lived the perfect life of absolute devotion that we failed to live, generating a positive, perfect righteousness.
And the passive obedience.
His passive obedience refers to his willing submission to the cross, where he absorbed the infinite, terrifying weight of divine wrath that was legally due to us for our lawlessness.
The text details Christ's threefold office here to explain how this all applies to us. As high priest, he offered himself as the perfect, unblemished sacrifice to cover the massive debt of sin.
And as prophet, he speaks the truth, revealing the infinite, forgiving heart of the Father to us.
And as king, he rules over us, actively subduing our natural, bitter, rebellious hearts. So if the debt of my cosmic treason is fully paid by the king, and the king has absorbed the lethal cost of my rebellion, then me holding a grudge against a fellow believer is essentially looking the king in the eye and telling him that his blood was not enough to cover their specific offense against me.
That's a heavy way to put it.
It is like saying, sure, you paid for my massive eternal treason, but their minor slight against my ego. Your sacrifice didn't quite cover that.
It is a weighty, terrifying conclusion, but it aligns perfectly with the argument of the text. Failing to extend charismai, hoarding your grace, and refusing to forgive freely indicates a complete misunderstanding or a total absence of saving grace in your own life.
So if you harbor bitterness,
The sources argue you are demonstrating an unregenerate heart that has never actually tasted divine pardon.
moving from ancient theology to the present day, how does this mandate confront the current cultural moment? I mean, the sources pull no punches regarding modern Western culture.
They highlight a stark sociological statistic. Over 31% of adults in Western nations report experiencing chronic loneliness.
31%.
And the authors identify this massive epidemic of isolation as the tragic, inevitable fruit of a self-absorbed existence.
Well, so.
Well, when a culture is obsessed with self-preservation, constantly advising people to cut off toxic individuals the moment they cause offense or discomfort, the inevitable result is widespread, crippling loneliness.
That makes total sense. The text shares a jarring quote from an 1843 sermon by a Scottish pastor named Robert Murray M'Cheyne. He said, "An old heart would rather part with its lifeblood than its money. You will be beggars throughout eternity."
Beggars throughout eternity.
The text applies this directly to the modern habit of hoarding grace. If you refuse to forgive, if you insist on keeping your ledger balanced, you are choosing eternal spiritual poverty.
So, how do the sources view other modern systems of thought that try to answer the human condition?
Well, the text outlines 4 specific ideologies that it fiercely rejects. And I need to pause here and say very clearly to you listening, we are just impartially reporting the claims of the source material today. We are not taking sides or endorsing these views. We are simply conveying the theological arguments contained in the original text.
Right. Our goal is just to lay out what the authors are saying.
Exactly. So what are the 4 frameworks they reject?
First, they reject Arminianism. The texts argue this theological system makes final justification conditional on continuous human performance. They claim this framework turns the Christian life into a miserable treadmill of legalistic fear, constantly robbing the believer of the assurance that Christ's work was actually sufficient.
Second, the sources reject Roman Catholicism. They argue this is because the Catholic framework requires ongoing sacramental penance and human cooperation for justification, instead of resting entirely and exclusively on Christ's finished substitutionary work on the cross.
Third, they reject the prosperity gospel. They argue this movement exploits the vulnerable by promising material wealth, physical health, and earthly comfort as the primary rewards of faith.
Creating sort of bait and switch.
Yes, a bait and switch that distracts people from pursuing holiness and finding their ultimate satisfaction in God alone.
And fourth, the sources reject critical race theory, often abbreviated as CRT. They describe it as a secular sociological framework that seeks to organize human relations around perpetual grievance, power struggles, and collective ethnic guilt.
And the authors argue this framework is incompatible with the gospel because it fundamentally denies the reconciling unity, total forgiveness, and equal footing of all believers found in Ephesians chapter 2.
Let me clarify a highly practical pastoral point here, because this is where theology meets the reality of living in a broken world.
Yeah, we have to talk about how this actually plays out.
Does this absolute mandate to continuously forgive mean tolerating abuse? Does the source material tell us to throw away wisdom, stay in dangerous situations, and just let violent or manipulative people trample us?
The text is careful to point out a crucial distinction here. True, active mercy does not forbid church discipline, wise boundaries, or lawful physical protection.
So you don't have to stay in harm's way.
Absolutely not. It does not demand that you remain in a physically or emotionally unsafe environment. What it strictly forbids is vengeance and internal coldness.
So you can have boundaries.
Yes, you can establish a firm, impenetrable boundary to protect your family from harm. You can call the authorities to report a crime while simultaneously releasing the perpetrator from the internal debt of your personal bitterness. You can protect yourself while still praying for their genuine repentance and salvation.
Wrapping up this massive scope of text we have covered today. A life is unwasted when Christ is treasured above all earthly possessions, when the physical body is utilized as an instrument for His glory rather than a monument to our own comfort.
And when our remaining days are spent actively bleeding grace to ensure the spiritual joy of others.
It is a total reorientation of everything we assume about success.
It demands that we stop looking at our lives as private property to be protected and start viewing ourselves as living instruments to be completely spent for the progress and joy of others in the faith.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Imagine your local community 100 years from now.
100 years.
Long after your career achievements are forgotten, long after your bank accounts are closed, your house is sold to strangers, and your resume has turned to dust. What if the only lasting impact of your physical existence was the generational ripple effect of a single, impossible act of forgiveness you chose to grant tomorrow morning?
That is a staggering thought.
Who is the specific person you are withholding grace from right now, and what eternal joy is being blocked by your refusal to burn the ledger? Thank you for joining the conversation and stepping into these deep theological waters with us. Until next time, keep thinking critically.